Of course.
Please.
So it's a pleasure, and thank you very much for the invitation for this very important anniversary. I like very much, as coordinator of the North Sea-Baltic Corridor, to be present to see that the past 100 years are prolonged with a project of a century, which is the Rail Baltica. I want to say a warmful hello to your Minister of Transport, Mr. Thales Linkaits. I am very glad that we can have a very strong cooperation and very confident one, and thank you for this opportunity to meet you here in Riga, and not only in Brussels or elsewhere. Thank you very much for this help. Thank you. So, I want also to say hello to all the participants, ladies and gentlemen. When the first railway lines were built in Europe, it was the beginning of a new industrial era, and the newly opened lines stimulated the development of towns, ports, new factories, and warehouses were built near railway tracks and lines. More than a century later, some may have expected railways to become out-fashioned, overtaken by new technologies and different modes of transport. But in the context of climate change, as the Minister said before, the air transport and road transport sectors are pointed to for their environmental impact, while rail transport is clearly seen as a part of the solution. And in Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania, we have a unique chance to prove how a new state-of-the-art railway line brings benefits both to the citizen mobility, to the economy, and for reaching sustainability goals. It is tempting to concentrate on the historic dimension at an anniversary conference like this one, but I have been asked to speak about the present day's mobility challenges and the development of the European Transport Corridor, which I have the honor to coordinate, the North Sea-Baltic Corridor, with Rail Baltica as one of its crucial components. But first of all, let me start with the broader context of mobility challenge in Europe. Growing volumes of passenger and freight traffic, in conjunction with the need to reduce harmful emissions from transport and adapting to climate change, are indeed posing a major challenge for the development of the EU's transport networks. Projections show an increase in the total freight transport activity by about 58%, or in another way to calculate, 1.2% per year between 2010 and 2050. Air and noise pollution, accidents, increasing demands, and often protests, also from the citizens, are challenges in particular for the cities and regions along the main transport axis. The projected growth means that all the main roads in the EU will be heavily congested to a point that it will not be possible to tackle the problem by building more roads. It therefore becomes an urgency to enable modal shift to rail and inland waterways by investing in the infrastructure and solving interoperability issues. Today already, the total external costs of transport in the EU 28 are estimated at about 1,000 billion euros annually, almost 7% of the GDP of the 28 EU member states. This relates to accident costs, which make up 29% of the total cost, congestion costs for 27%, and environmental costs 44%, comprising effects on climate change, air pollution, noise, well-to-tank, and habitat damage. The road sector is the main source of these costs, as it is the dominant mode of transport. By fostering multimodality and the shift to more sustainable transport modes, the gradual completion of the TEN-T network contributes to coping with these challenges in a more coherent and effective manner across the European Union. The TEN-T network completion will provide more adequate transport infrastructure coverage, while at the same time supporting a concentration of transnational traffic and long-distance flows. But focusing on the long-distance connections alone would be and not be enough. Urban nodes are crucial for the overall efficiency of our transport networks. Given that space is a scarce resource in urban areas, it has to be used in intelligent ways through a comprehensive and sustainable approach to urban planning and mobility. Sustainable and seamless transport can only be achieved with such a comprehensive and forward-looking vision. The blueprint of the current EU transport policy is the White Paper on Transport of 2011. It sets out 10 goals to achieve a competitive and sustainable transport system with a reduction of at least 60% of greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector by 2050 with respect to 1990. One of these goals is precisely to achieve a modal shift. 30% of road freight over 300 kilometers should shift to other modes such as rail or waterborne transport by 2030, and more than 50% by 2050, facilitated by efficient and green freight corridors. With a view to passengers, the White Paper aimed at tripling the length of the existing high-speed rail network by 2030 and maintaining a dense railway network in all member states. By 2050, the majority of medium-distance passenger transport should thus go by rail. Use of alternative fuels and digital solutions in all transport modes are other key goals of the White Paper, as well as moving towards full application of user pays and polluter pays principles. Naturally, infrastructure plays a key role in allowing the single European transport era described in the White Paper to emerge. The aim to consolidate and develop a fully functional and EU-wide multimodal TEN-T core network by 2030 was therefore translated into a EU regulation, the TEN-T regulation of 2013, which is underpinned by several EU investment instruments. As an illustration, you can see on this map the railways, ports, and terminals which are part of the TEN-T in Latvia. The core network in bold lines will have to meet certain standards in 2030, while the comprehensive network will have to be completed in 2050. The TEN-T corridors are a governance tool to enable multimodality and to achieve modal shift through better coordination among the various stakeholders involved in the development of transport infrastructure. There are also integrators or horizontal policy objectives such as decarbonization and digitalization across borders. Among the NIN's TEN-T core network corridors, the North Sea-Baltic corridor is the only one to be situated exclusively in the north of Europe. It is the northernmost corridor connecting the western and the eastern markets. It connects the ports of the eastern shore of the Baltic Sea with ports of the North Sea situated in northern Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, crossing Poland, of course, in between. The main transport modes covered by the corridor are rail, road, inland waterways, seaports, and airports. The corridor can provide a way to develop global transport routes, as it is linking some of the most important ports in Europe, and the objective is to link these ports not only by sea, but with all available transport modes, including rail, roads, inland waterways, and air, ensuring multimodal links. The North Sea-Baltic corridor should also provide the basis for the large-scale deployment of new technologies and innovation, which can help to enhance the overall efficiency of the European transport sector and help to reduce its carbon footprint, for instance, well-developed ITS, intelligent transport system, in the different parts of the corridor. I think, okay. With the corridor studies and the consultation through the corridor fora, we have established solid project pipelines for each of the corridors expressed in the work plans. The analysis has shown that the investment needs in transport infrastructure are huge, more than 750 billion euros of investment is needed between 2016 and 2030, just on the corridors. For the North Sea-Baltic corridor, we have identified investment needs of 111 billion euro on the corridor by 2030. This includes larger and smaller investments in all modes of transport, including infrastructure for alternative fuels and intelligent transport systems, and also interconnection between modes in the corridor's nodes. EU funds help in many cases to make these projects happen, with 24 billion euros allocated for the period 2014-2020, a historically unprecedented scale of direct EU investment in transport. The Connecting Europe facility, the CEF as we call it, is the key EU co-financing instrument for this policy. In addition to the Connecting Europe facility, around 70 billion euros have been programmed in EU co-funding for transport projects from the Cohesion Fund and the European Regional Development Fund for the period 2014-2020. Latvia plans to invest 1.2 billion euros in transport from these two funds, of which 36% will benefit the railway sector. As recently as in July this year, the Commission has approved the funding of 318 million euros for the electrification of the lines between Rīgā, Daugavpils and Rezekne on the TEN-T core network. The third main instrument in the European Fund for Strategic Investment geared towards mobilizing private capital. It is clear that we need to make more efforts to mobilize private investment to deliver the TEN-T wherever this is feasible. Public grants will not be sufficient to cover all the investment needs. It is worth emphasizing that through CEF, grant support of 20.8 billion euros has already been allocated since 2014 to 756 transport projects. A share of 88% of this funding contributes to the development of the core network, and a share of 77% has been allocated to rail projects. Rail is really the priority, if I can say, for this budget and investment. These projects will contribute to the removal of 282 bottlenecks by 2023, mainly in the rail sector, and improve thousands of kilometers of railways and inland waterways. The North Sea-Baltic corridor has benefited from 3.1 billion euro of CEF co-funding so far. As European coordinators, we strongly advocate an ambitious budget for grants in the next multi-annual financial framework for the further development of the TEN-T to meet our targets of completing the core network by 2030. The EU long-term budget figures for 2021 to 2027 will be discussed at the highest political level in the upcoming European Council meetings. So it's an appeal to the ministry and the Latvian government to support this budget. In this context, it is especially important to highlight that implementing these priorities will bring tremendous benefits to the citizens and to the economy. Our initial evaluation shows that investments completing the core network corridors alone will generate some 4.6 trillion of cumulated GDP in the period 2016-2030, 1.8% additional annual growth in 2030. The number of job years would reach around 13 million, and 7 million tons of CO2 will be reduced. As mentioned before, the TEN-T corridors are tools to ensure that these investments are made in a coherent and coordinated way. This is especially relevant in the case of cross-border projects. Coordination and joint project implementation between member states in a cross-border context does not happen by itself, which brings me to the Rail Baltica project, one of the key elements for completing the North Sea-Baltic corridor. Rail Baltica is one of the key priorities of the work plan of the North Sea-Baltic corridor. It is the largest pan-Baltic infrastructure project ever, and it is also a key project for Europe, counting among the flagship projects of CEF. Rail Baltica fulfills many goals of the European infrastructure and mobility policy, moving freight from road to rail and supporting sustainable transport corridors, connecting the eastern and western parts of the EU, connecting peripheral regions to the center, creating corridors crossing and connecting many member states, just to name a few. And the President named all the partners he wants to know and to develop investment and cooperation with. Rail Baltica will create a backbone infrastructure connecting the capitals of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. Until now, there has been a clear and unequivocal expression of political support in all 5 member states, which is crucial for the successful implementation of the project. Support at the EU level is equally strong and reflected in the financing decisions. So far, 788 million euros have been allocated to the project in the Baltic states, as well as 800 million euros for the modernization of the sections in Poland. It has been a very important step that Poland has taken the decision to raise the speed level on the Rail Baltica line on its territory. It is a concrete commitment to the project as a clear sign of trust gained in the project's implementation in the Baltic states. Equally, I am very delighted that Finland is discussing the official invitation from the Baltic ministers and created the structure that will become one of the shareholders on the joint venture IB Rail. Exchanges with the stakeholders clearly show that the Finnish industry has a keen interest in developing this land-based connection to the Finnish export markets in Central and Southeast Europe and beyond. Let me briefly remind you about some benefits that this project will bring to the economy and societies of the Baltic Sea region. Rail Baltica will connect the Baltic capitals in a way that they have never been connected in their history. Getting from Tallinn to Riga or from Riga to Vilnius in less than 2 hours means more commuting between the capitals, as well as opportunities for tourism. Passengers will save more than 5 million hours each year. This is important. There is a value for that. Already now, we can see that there is a great interest among the public in the indicative travel times and operational schedules, which shows that people are looking forward to Rail Baltica trains connecting Finland, the Baltic states, and Poland at regular intervals. Rail Baltica also opens the possibility for night trains connecting up to Berlin, which is a mode of travel which is more and more demanded, again, by the citizens who are aware of their carbon prints. No doubt, this rail connection will open up new opportunities that bring positive disruptive effects on the business in this era, as the whole region will become much more intertwined. Today, Via Baltica, which connects the Baltic countries by road, experiences more and more congestion, day by day. Moving people and freight to the rails would be an important step towards safer, more sustainable and less congested connections. Thanks to the Rail Baltica, road safety on the Via Baltica road corridor will improve and 400 lives could be saved within 30 years of operation. Rail Baltica is also fully in line with the goals set in the Paris Agreement to contain climate change. Through potential modal shift from road to rail, Rail Baltica will contribute to cutting CO2 emissions and the environmental footprint of the transport sector in the whole region, reducing the need for investment in roads. Railway is the only major transport mode that does not depend almost entirely on fossil fuels, and its share of Europe's transport energy consumption is less than 2%, despite a market share of over 8.5%. According to the estimates, this model shift would also bring air pollution reduction benefits over 6 billion euros over the period up to 2055. Rail Baltica also promotes military mobility as it is adding a key infrastructure connection, fostering the security dimension of the European Union. As Rail Baltica is a long-term project and relates well to the potential trends of the global transport policy, such as the increased importance of the Arctic area, as well as the land connection to Asia. The Arctic dimension will be better reflected in the corridor network with the extension of the North Sea Baltic and the Scandinavian Mediterranean corridors, with a new period starting from 2021. As for the connection to the Far East, more and more trains are running today already between Europe and Asia, supported by the development of the Belt and Road Initiative. There will be more than one entry point to the EU and European, as Asian operators are keen to choose those entry points that make it possible to shift to the European gauge rail tracks. Rather than continuing to see themselves as competitors in the railway sector, the Baltic states should take the opportunity of the realization of the Rail Baltica backbone infrastructure to develop a joint vision on becoming a performant Baltic platform for logistics, serving intra-EU as well as international trade flows. While competition among railway undertakings is stimulating, the infrastructure managers should be working hand in hand. The extension of the North Sea Baltic rail freight corridor to Latvia and Estonia in 2020 is the first step in this direction. The next speaker, Timo Riihimäki, will develop much more on this topic, I'm sure. In this context, it will not come as a surprise to you that the Commission supports the integrated management of the future Rail Baltica line by one single entity. It is simply essential for the realization of its full business potential that Rail Baltica relies fully on common rules and agreements, and it is managed as one single entity. This does not mean that the joint manager would not draw on the competencies of the national infrastructures managers and fully take into account relevant national security concerns. This is also in line with the expectations of the customers. The Rail Baltica business network has studied the expectations of the domestic business sectors towards Rail Baltica over the past 2 years and came to interesting results that can feed into the business plan of the line. These results that show that mature businesses require railway productivity improvements, and dynamic small to medium enterprises expect high service quality, including reliable on-time deliveries, integrated logistical services, and cost levels, which would rival competing modes of transport. Most of all, companies expect Rail Baltica to set a new service standard in the railway sector, and its management practices optimize logistic flow control and establish an effective link with Central Europe. Ever since the Baltic states and Poland became EU member states, the Commission has been encouraging them to pursue cross-border integration of the EU transport area. With a forward-looking management model for Rail Baltica, the Baltic states can become real front-runners in further developing the single European transport area. In conclusion, it is clear that there is still a lot of work to be accomplished before we can speak of a successful implementation of the TEN-T corridors. But there is also clear progress already achieved. Some important investments on the corridors have already been completed or are about to be completed, such as the Amsterdam Sea Lock on the NSB corridor, which will open at the end of this year. When it comes to the larger projects, I would like to stress that they go hand in hand with wider improvements of the transport system, be it through access routes or urban planning to adapt to the disruptive change that they bring about. To take the example of Rail Baltica, once again, it will have a strong impact on the cities that it connects, and we need to prepare for this new opportunity for passenger mobility and freight movements as today in order to maximize its benefits. I wish that rail will become a natural choice for passengers in the Baltic states, not only on the new high-speed Rail Baltica network, but also regionally, and this is discussed in these days. Rail Baltica can be a catalyst for that, just like it opens up new freight routes that will strengthen the position of the Baltic states as a logistic platform with diverse connection. Transport flows are the lifeblood of our economy, and this is especially true for the peripheral areas. And you know that for companies looking on logistic services and platforms is a reason to establish and to invest. The EU's transport policy is now focused much more towards the internalization of external costs, and sustainability becomes even more of a decisive factor. Prioritizing more environmentally friendly transport modes will be the guiding principle of EU transport policy for the next decades to come when delivering the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. This is good news for the railway sector and makes me feel optimistic, even if it is also difficult sometimes for the coordinator and all the partners, but I am really optimistic when wishing all the best for a prosperous development of the Latvian railways over the next 100 years, with a project of a century, the Rail Baltica. Thank you very much.